The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was built to make visitors feel small. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Its walls were covered with the flags of 100 species, each one older than human civilization itself. And at the center of it all sat the High Chancellor, a Malorian named Zorath, whose purple skin and 6 eyes had witnessed 3 centuries of galactic politics. Ambassador Daniel Shaw stood before him. Feeling very small indeed, Daniel was 53 years old. He had gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from too many sleepless nights. For the past 10 years, he had served as humanity's voice in this hall. For the past 10 years, he had asked the same question. And for the past 10 years, he had received the same answer. The Council has reviewed humanity's application for full membership, Zorath announced, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. The application is denied. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He had expected this. He always expected this. But it still hurt. May I ask why? He said, keeping his voice calm and professional. Zorath waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. Humanity is still a young species. You have been part of our galaxy for only 37 years. The Malorians waited 8,000 years before receiving full membership. The Korath waited 6,000. Surely you can be patient. Patient. Daniel wanted to laugh. For 37 years, humanity had been patient. They had followed every rule. They had paid every tax. They had answered every call for help. And still, they were treated like children begging for a seat at the adults' table. With respect, High Chancellor, Daniel said, humanity has contributed more to this council in 37 years than most species contribute in a millennium. A ripple of angry murmurs spread through the hall. The ambassadors of a dozen species shifted in their seats, offended by the human's boldness. But Daniel was past caring about offending anyone. We have fought your wars, he continued. When the Velanthi swarm attacked the outer colonies, it was human soldiers who held the line. When the trade routes were threatened by pirates, it was human ships that cleared them. When the Drevan plague struck, it was human doctors who found the cure. He paused, looking around at the faces watching him. Some were sympathetic. Most were not. We have asked for nothing in return except to be treated as equals. And every time we are told to wait, to be patient, to know our place. Zorath's 6 eyes narrowed. You speak as if humanity has been mistreated. But you have been given much. You have access to our technology. You trade in our markets. You live under our protection. Protection? Daniel felt his composure cracking. 3 days ago, the Velanthi attacked the Korath mining colonies in the Siren system. Do you know who answered the distress call? Silence. Humanity, Daniel said. We sent the warship Ardent Horizon and 3,000 soldiers to defend the Korath. The same Korath who call us the galaxy's servants behind our backs. The same Korath who refused to let human traders dock at their stations because they found our smell offensive. More silence. Some of the ambassadors had the decency to look uncomfortable. Captain Laura Vance led that mission, Daniel continued. She's one of the finest officers humanity has ever produced. She held the line for 18 hours while the Korath evacuated their people. 18 hours of constant fighting. 18 hours of watching her soldiers die. His voice grew quieter, but somehow it seemed to fill the entire hall. When the battle was over, 3,000 human soldiers were dead. 3,000 families lost someone they loved. 3,000 empty chairs at 3,000 dinner tables. And for what? To protect the species that won't even look us in the eye. Zorath shifted in his seat. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw something like guilt in those 6 purple eyes. But then it was gone. The sacrifice of your soldiers is... Noted, Zorath said carefully. The Council expresses its gratitude. Gratitude. Daniel nodded slowly. Then perhaps the council will approve emergency aid for the families of the fallen. Medical care. Financial support. Help for the children who will grow up without parents. He already knew the answer. He asked anyway. Zorath consulted briefly with the advisors beside him. Then he turned back to Daniel with an expression of false sympathy. The council budget is limited. We cannot provide aid to every species that suffers losses in battle. If we made an exception for humanity, we would have to make exceptions for everyone. I see. Daniel's voice was flat. So when humans die protecting council worlds, we are heroes. But when we ask for help burying our dead, we are just another species with our hand out. Ambassador Shaw. Zorath's tone grew cold. You forget your place. Humanity is a valued associate of this council. But you are not members. You have not earned the rights that come with membership. Perhaps if your species spent less time complaining and more time proving your worth, things would be different. Daniel stared at the High Chancellor for a long moment. He thought about all the years he had spent in this hall, all the speeches he had given, all the compromises he had made, all the insults he had swallowed with a smile. He thought about Captain Laura Vance, who was probably still scrubbing the blood of her soldiers off the deck of her ship. He thought about the 3,000 families who would never see their loved ones again. And something inside him, something that had been bending for 37 years, finally broke. You're right, High Chancellor, Daniel said quietly. I did forget my place. Thank you for reminding me. He turned and walked out of the hall without another word. No one tried to stop him. No one even seemed to notice. That night, alone in his office at the human embassy, Daniel sat in the dark for a long time. He looked at the pictures on his wall. Pictures of human soldiers standing proud in council uniforms. Pictures of human doctors healing alien patients. Pictures of human engineers building wonders on distant worlds. 37 years of service. 37 years of sacrifice. 37 years of being told they weren't good enough. Daniel turned on his communication terminal and composed a message. It was short, just a few sentences, but it would change everything. He sent it to Earth, to the leaders of the Human Confederation, to every human vessel and colony scattered across the galaxy. The message said, we gave them everything. They gave us nothing. It's time to come home. Then Daniel Shaw, Ambassador of Humanity, began to pack his bags. No announcement was made. No protest was filed. No ultimatum was delivered. Humanity simply decided, quietly and collectively, that they were done. The galaxy had taken them for granted for the last time. The first thing Captain Laura Vance did when she received the message was read it 3 times. Then she sat down heavily in her command chair and let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for years. We gave them everything. They gave us nothing. It's time to come home. 20 words. That was all it took to end 37 years of service. Laura was 41 years old. She had spent her entire adult life in the service of the Galactic Council. She had fought in 14 major battles. She had lost count of how many soldiers she had buried. And 3 days ago, she had watched 3,000 of her people die defending a species that hated them. She pressed a button on her chair. All hands, this is the captain. Set course for Sol System. We're going home. No one questioned the order. No one asked why. Laura suspected her crew had been waiting for this moment just as long as she had. The ardent horizon turned away from council space and began its long journey back to Earth. As they passed through the Chorus system, a dozen ships tried to hail them. Laura ordered her communications officer to ignore every single one. Let them wonder, she thought. Let them worry. For once, let them feel what it's like to be ignored. Across the galaxy. Similar scenes were playing out on 1,000 worlds, on Meloria Prime, the heart of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Daniel Shaw was closing the human embassy. He had worked there for 10 years. He knew every corner of that building, every crack in the walls, every stubborn door that stuck when it rained. Now he walked through its empty halls one last time, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He left behind only one thing, a small datapad on the reception desk. On it was humanity's official letter of withdrawal from the Galactic Council. Daniel had written it himself. It was exactly 47 words long. The Human Confederation hereby withdraws from all treaties, agreements, and obligations with the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We thank you for the opportunity to serve. We wish you well in all your future endeavors. We will not be returning. Goodbye. Short, polite, final. Daniel walked out the front door and didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, humans began disappearing from every corner of the galaxy. It happened so slowly, so quietly, that at first nobody noticed. Dr. Kevin Moore had worked on the Council's communication relay network for 20 years. He was the best engineer they had ever employed. Under his leadership, the network had grown from a simple system connecting a dozen worlds to a vast web that allowed instant communication across 9 sectors. One morning, Kevin simply didn't come to work. Neither did his team of 300 human technicians. They left no note, no explanation. Their desks were clean. Their tools were organized. But they were gone. When the driven supervisor tried to access their files, he found that everything had been encrypted. The passwords had been changed. 20 years of work, locked away behind codes that nobody else knew. On the agricultural world of Yelthi Prime, human farmers had been teaching the locals advanced growing techniques for generations. They had turned a planet that struggled to feed itself into one of the most productive farming worlds in the sector. One by one, the human farmers said goodbye to their students. They were kind about it. They shook hands. They offered best wishes. But they wouldn't say where they were going or why. "You've learned everything we can teach you," said one old farmer named Greg Palmer to the young Yelthi who had worked beside him for years. "You'll do fine without us." The young Yelthi wasn't so sure. But by the time he thought to ask more questions, Greg was already gone. On the medical station orbiting Drevum Prime, Dr. Amy Patterson was packing up her clinic. She had treated patients there for 12 years. She had saved thousands of lives. She had delivered babies and held the hands of the dying. She had given that station everything she had. Now she was leaving, and she felt nothing but relief. A Dreven administrator rushed in as she was loading the last of her equipment. "Dr. Patterson, where are you going? You can't leave. We have patients who need you." Amy smiled sadly. "Your people have doctors. They'll take care of your patients. But they're not as good as you. They don't know the procedures you developed. Then they'll learn." Amy picked up her bag. "Goodbye." She walked past the administrator without another word. Behind her, she could hear him shouting for security. But what could they do? Arrest her for wanting to go home? In the great hall of the Galactic Council, the mood was one of confusion and growing irritation. "What do you mean? The humans are leaving?" High Chancellor Zorath demanded. The Malorian aide who had delivered the news shifted nervously. "Exactly what I said, High Chancellor. Human personnel across the galaxy are abandoning their posts. The embassy on Maloria Prime has been emptied. Human ships are returning to Earth. We've received reports from dozens of worlds." Zorath waved dismissively. "So a few humans got offended and went home. They'll be back once they calm down. They always come back." The aide hesitated. "High Chancellor, respectfully, I don't think they will. Not this time." "Nonsense. Where else would they go? What would they do without us?" Zorath actually laughed. "Humans need the Council. They need access to our technology, our trade routes, our protection. Give them a month, and they'll be begging us to take them back." The aide said nothing. He had learned long ago not to argue with the High Chancellor in the embassy district. A young Drevan ambassador named Veltris watched the human embassy building with worried eyes. She had worked with humans for years. She had considered many of them friends, and she had seen the look in Daniel Shaw's eyes at the last council meeting. That wasn't the look of someone who would come crawling back. She tried to send a message to her human contacts, asking what was happening, asking if there was anything she could do. Her messages went unanswered. On her way back to her own embassy, she passed a young human woman walking in the opposite direction, carrying a travel bag. "Excuse me," Veltri said. "May I ask where you're going?" The young woman smiled politely. Veltris recognized her as Megan Torres, a junior attach who had worked at the human embassy. "We're going home," Megan said simply. "But why? What's happening? Is there anything we can do?" Megan's smile didn't waver, but her eyes were cold. "Good luck," she said. Then she walked away, and Veltris was left standing alone on the empty street, with a terrible feeling growing in his stomach. Something had changed. Something important. And Veltris was beginning to suspect that the galaxy would never be the same again. The humans were leaving, and they weren't coming back. The first problem appeared 6 months after the humans left. It was small, almost too small to notice. A communication relay in the outer reach stopped working. The technicians who came to fix it were confused. The relay was one of the most advanced pieces of equipment in the sector. It had been designed and maintained by Dr. Kevin Moore's team for the past 2 decades. It should have worked perfectly for another century at least. But when they opened it up, they found something strange. The inside of the relay looked nothing like the blueprints. Kevin had modified it over the years, improving it piece by piece until it was completely different from the original design. He had made it faster, stronger, and more efficient. He had also made it impossible for anyone else to understand. The technicians stared at the tangle of wires and circuits. They had no idea what any of it did. They had no idea how to fix it. After 3 weeks of trying, they gave up and built a new relay from scratch. It was slower, weaker, and less reliable than the old one. Messages that used to arrive in seconds now took minutes. But at least it worked. That was the first crack. Many more would follow. On the medical station orbiting Drevan Prime, the problem started with a simple software update. The station's medical computers ran on programs that Dr. Amy Patterson had developed over her 12 years of service. When the programs needed updating, the Drevan doctors tried to do it themselves. They failed. The code was too complex, too interconnected, too brilliant. Every time they changed one thing, 3 other things broke. After a month of trying, the medical computers crashed completely. For 2 terrible weeks, the doctors had to work without their most important tools. Patients who should have been easily diagnosed went untreated. Surgeries that should have been routine became dangerous. 7 people died before the computers were finally restored to a basic working state. The restored system was slow and clumsy compared to what Amy had built. But it was all they had. On Yelphi Prime, the farming world, the harvest season came and went with disappointing results. Without the human farmers to guide them, the Yelphi made mistakes. They planted the wrong crops at the wrong times. They used too much water or not enough. They didn't recognize the signs of disease until it was too late. The harvest was 40% smaller than the year before. For the first time in a generation, Yelphi Prime had to import food from other worlds. And then, in the middle of all these small disasters, something much bigger happened. The Volanthi swarm returned. They came out of the dark spaces between stars. Billions of creatures moving as one, hungry and unstoppable. They attacked without warning, just as they had done 6 months earlier when human soldiers had died defending the Korath colonies. But this time, there were no humans to defend anyone. The Council assembled its fleet with impressive speed. Ships from a dozen species gathered at the edge of the threatened sector. Admiral Tyrix of the Malorian Navy was given command, and he was confident. "We have more ships than the humans ever did," he told his officers. "We have better technology. We don't need them." He was wrong. The Battle of Siren's Gate lasted only 4 hours. It should have been a victory. The Council fleet outnumbered the Volanti 3-1. But from the very beginning, everything went wrong. The communication network, damaged and degraded since the humans left, couldn't handle the demands of a major battle. Orders were delayed. Warnings arrived too late. Ships that should have been coordinating their attacks instead stumbled into each other. Admiral Tyrix watched in horror as 2 of his dreadnoughts collided, because their navigation systems received contradicting commands. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a small sun dot in the chaos. The Volanti tore through the Council fleet like a blade through paper. Ship after ship was destroyed. Thousands of soldiers died in the cold emptiness between the stars. When it was over, the Council had lost half its fleet. The Volanti had lost almost nothing. Admiral Tyrix survived the battle, but he never commanded another ship. He spent the rest of his life haunted by a simple question: how had humans made it look so easy? Back on Meloria Prime, High Chancellor Zorath was no longer laughing. The planetary shield grid, the system that protected the homeworld from attack, had begun to fail. It flickered on and off without warning, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. Each time it happened, the entire planet held its breath. The shield grid had been designed by Melorian engineers, but it had been maintained and improved by a human engineer named Amy Patterson for the past 12 years. She had made it stronger, more reliable, more efficient. She had also made it completely dependent on modifications that nobody else understood. Technicians worked around the clock trying to stabilize the system. They succeeded, eventually, but only by removing many of Amy's improvements. The shield was weaker now than it had been when she arrived. 12 years of progress, undone in a matter of weeks. Zorath sat in his private chambers, staring at reports he didn't want to read. The communication network was failing. The military had been devastated. The medical systems were struggling. The food supply was uncertain. And everywhere he looked, the same pattern repeated itself. The humans had been there, quietly making everything work. And now they were gone. One of his aides approached nervously. "High Chancellor, the Dreven ambassador has sent an urgent message to Earth, requesting human assistance." Zorath looked up sharply. Did he have permission to do that? No, High Chancellor. But he felt the situation was desperate enough to act on his own. And? Did they respond? The aide shook his head. The message was received, but there was no response. Zorath closed his eyes. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he had never felt before. Fear across the galaxy. Other species were feeling the same thing. The Korath, who had been saved by human soldiers, found themselves unable to defend their own borders. The Yelthi, who had been fed by human farmers, faced the prospect of famine. The Drevens, who had been healed by human doctors, watched their medical systems slowly crumble. And through it all, humanity remained silent. They were out there, somewhere beyond the borders of Council space. They were alive and well. They were simply choosing not to answer. Ambassador Velters of the Dreven Confederation sat alone in her office, reading report after report of disasters and failures. She thought about all the times she had heard her colleagues mock humans. She thought about all the times she had seen humans treated as lesser beings, as servants, as tools to be used and discarded. She thought about Megan Torres, the young human attach who had smiled and said, "Good luck," before walking away. Now, Velters understood what that smile had meant. It had meant, "You're going to need it." 2 years after humanity's departure, the galaxy was burning. The Volanthi swarm had conquered 7 star systems. Billions of people had fled their homes, becoming refugees on worlds that could barely feed their own populations. The Council's military, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. The communication network had degraded so badly that messages sometimes took weeks to arrive. Ambassadors made decisions without knowing what was happening on other worlds. Fleets were sent to battles that had already been lost. Relief supplies arrived at colonies that had already been abandoned. And on Dreven Prime, 2 billion people were starving. The agricultural AI that managed the planet's food production had been programmed by human specialists 30 years ago. It had worked flawlessly ever since. But last spring, something went wrong. A small error cascaded through the system, spreading like a disease until the entire network collapsed. Without the AI, the Drevens didn't know when to plant their crops. They didn't know how much water to use. They didn't know which fields were fertile and which were exhausted. They tried their best, but their best wasn't good enough. The harvest failed. The reserves ran out. And then the dying began. Ambassador Veltris watched it all happen from her office on Meloria Prime. She read the reports. She saw the pictures. She heard the numbers. 2 billion. That was how many of her people were expected to die before the famine ended. 2 billion. She sent message after message to Earth, begging for help. She promised anything, everything. She apologized for every insult, every slight, every moment of disrespect. Her messages were received. None were answered. High Chancellor Zorath was a broken man. His purple skin had faded to gray. His 6 eyes, once sharp and proud, now stared at nothing. He had sent 17 formal requests for human assistance. All 17 had been ignored. "They're punishing us," he said to his empty chamber. "They're letting us die to teach us a lesson." But that wasn't quite true, and somewhere deep inside, Zorath knew it. The humans weren't punishing anyone. They simply weren't helping. There was a difference, even if the result felt the same. In desperation, the Council decided to send a diplomatic mission to Earth. They would travel to the human homeworld and beg in person. Surely, if they showed enough humility, enough regret, the humans would take pity on them. Nobody wanted to lead the mission. It was seen as hopeless, embarrassing, a fool's errand. But one ambassador stepped forward. Her name was Kira. She was a Veleth, one of the few species that had always treated humans with genuine respect. She was old now, nearly 200 years by her species count, but her mind was sharp and her heart was kind. "I'll go," she told the Council. "The humans know me. Some of them might still trust me." The journey to Earth took 3 weeks. The diplomatic vessel crossed through territories that had once been safe and prosperous. Now they were empty, abandoned, dark. The only signs of life were the occasional refugee ship, fleeing from one disaster toward another. When they finally reached the Sol system, Kira was surprised by what she found. Earth was beautiful. The planet hung in space like a blue and green jewel, surrounded by gleaming orbital stations and busy shipyards. Everywhere Kira looked, she saw life, activity, purpose. The humans had not just survived without the Council. They had thrived. Her ship was escorted to a landing pad outside a city called Geneva. The buildings were elegant and clean. The streets were filled with people walking, talking, laughing. Children played in parks while their parents watched from nearby benches. There was no sign of war here. No sign of famine or disease or despair. The humans had turned inward, and in doing so, they had built something wonderful. Kira was taken to meet the Speaker of the Human Confederation, a man named Nathan Cole. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 50 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. He received her in a simple office with large windows overlooking a peaceful valley. "Ambassador Kira," he said, rising to greet her. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Kira agreed. "Speaker Cole, I come to you with humility. The galaxy is suffering. Our people are dying. We need help." Nathan nodded slowly. "I know. We've been watching. Then you know how desperate we are. The Volanthi have conquered 7 systems. The Dreven famine has killed millions. The communication network is failing. Our military is broken. Everything is falling apart." She paused, gathering her courage for what she had to say next. "We were wrong, Speaker Cole. The Council was wrong. We treated humanity like servants, like tools, like lesser beings. We took everything you gave us and offered nothing in return. We were arrogant and cruel and blind." Her voice trembled. "And now we are paying the price." Nathan listened without interrupting. His face showed no anger, no satisfaction, no triumph. Only sadness. "I believe you," he said when she finished. "And I appreciate your honesty. But I need to ask you a question. Anything." Nathan stood and walked to the window. For a long moment, he looked out at the valley below, at the children playing in the distance, at the world his people had built. "When we suffered," he said quietly, "when our soldiers died defending your worlds, when we begged for help burying our dead, what did the Council do?" Kira felt her heart sink. She knew the answer. Everyone knew the answer. "Nothing," she whispered. "The Council did nothing." Nathan turned to face her. 37 years, Ambassador. We gave the galaxy 37 years of service. We asked only to be treated as equals. We were refused." He shook his head slowly. "We lost 3,000 soldiers at Siren. 3,000 families destroyed. And when we asked for help, we were told to know our place." Tears were forming in Kira's eyes. She had not cried in decades. She had not thought she was still capable of it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." "I believe you," Nathan said again. "And I hold no hatred for you personally, Ambassador. You were always kind to us. But the answer is no. Humanity will not return to the Council. We will not come back to be used and discarded again. Please." Kira's voice broke. "People are dying. Children are dying. Whatever we did, whatever mistakes we made, they don't deserve to suffer for it." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. "Go home, Ambassador Kira. Tell the Council that humanity wishes them no ill will. We don't want revenge. We don't want to see the galaxy burn. But we will not return. Not like this. Not as servants." He met her eyes. "The galaxy needs to learn to stand on its own." Kira left Earth with empty hands and a heavy heart. As her ship climbed away from that beautiful blue world, she looked back at the planet where humanity had found peace. They had everything they needed down there. They had safety and prosperity and happiness. They had no reason to come back to a galaxy that had treated them so poorly. And yet, somehow, Kira couldn't help feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. Something was coming. Something was changing. She just didn't know what. 5 years after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council was gone. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Simply gone. Dissolved like morning mist under a rising sun. The old order had collapsed under its own weight. And something new had risen from the ashes. The final blow came at the Battle of Meloria Prime. The Volanthi swarm had pushed deep into Council territory, conquering world after world. And now they had come for the heart of the old empire itself. High Chancellor Zorath led the defense personally. He was old and tired and broken, but he refused to run. This was his home. This was his world. If it was going to fall, he would fall with it. The battle lasted 3 days. The Malorian fleet fought with desperate courage, knowing that there would be no retreat, no surrender, no rescue. They fought alone because there was no one left to help them. On the third day, Zorith's flagship was destroyed. His last words, transmitted to the surviving ships, were simple and quiet. "Tell him I'm sorry. Tell them all I'm sorry." Nobody knew exactly who he meant by them. Perhaps he meant his people. Perhaps he meant the other species of the Council. Or perhaps, in his final moments, he was thinking about the humans he had dismissed and mocked and driven away. The Volanthi were stopped that day, but not by the Malorians. They were stopped by their own success. They had expanded too fast, conquered too much. Their supply lines were stretched thin. Their forces were scattered across a dozen worlds they couldn't hold. Within a year, the swarm had retreated back to the dark spaces between stars. They would return someday. Everyone knew that. But for now, the immediate threat was over. What remained was a galaxy in ruins. The old council was gone. The Malorian dominion, which had led the galaxy for 10,000 years, was shattered. The Korath had retreated behind their borders and refused to speak to anyone. The Drevens were still recovering from the famine that had killed 2 billion of their people. But from the wreckage, something new began to grow. Ambassador Kira of the Velith Collective gathered the survivors together. She was over 200 years old now, ancient by any standard. But her mind was still sharp, and her spirit was unbroken. "We can't go back to the way things were," she told the assembled representatives of a dozen broken species. The old council failed because it was built on arrogance and cruelty. We treated some species as masters and others as servants. We took without giving. We demanded without earning. She looked around at the faces watching her. Some were hostile. Some were skeptical. But most were simply tired, too exhausted by years of suffering to argue anymore. "If we want to build something that lasts," Kira continued, "we have to do it differently. We have to treat every species as an equal. We have to earn trust instead of demanding it. We have to give as much as we take." It took 2 years of negotiations, compromises, and arguments. But in the end, they did it. The Galactic Compact was formed, a new alliance built on principles that the old council had never understood. Every species was equal, regardless of how old they were or how powerful. Decisions were made by consensus, not by the whims of a single High Chancellor. Aid was given freely, without expectation of payment or service. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and frustrating. But it was better than what had come before. When the compact was finally established, Kira made one last journey to Earth. She traveled alone this time, without guards or escorts. She was coming not to beg, but to deliver a message. Speaker Nathan Cole received her in the same simple office where they had met 3 years earlier. He looked older now, gray at his temples, lines around his eyes. Beside him sat 2 other humans. Daniel Shaw, the former ambassador who had sent the message that started it all, and Captain Laura Vance, who had led the last human ship out of Council space. "Ambassador Kira," Nathan said. "Welcome back." Kira bowed her head in greeting. "Thank you for seeing me again, Speaker Cole. I come with news." She told them about the new compact. She explained its principles, its rules, its commitments. She described how the species of the galaxy had learned, through suffering and loss, the lessons that humanity had tried to teach them for 37 years. When she finished, there was a long silence. "We have learned," Kira said quietly. "We have built what you once asked us to build. We do not ask you to return. We do not demand anything. We only ask that you consider us friends." Nathan looked at Daniel, who had fought so long for this moment. The old ambassador's eyes were wet with tears. He made no effort to hide. "Friends," Daniel said slowly, testing the word like he had never heard it before. "Friends are a good place to start." Laura Vance spoke for the first time. Her voice was rough, hardened by years of command and loss. My soldiers died for people who despised us. I watched 3,000 of my people burn so that the Korath could escape. Kira nodded. I know. And I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. No, it doesn't. Nothing can bring them back. Kira met Lara's eyes without flinching. But we can honor their memory by building something better. We can make sure they didn't die for nothing. Lara was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly she nodded. Humanity did not rejoin the Council, because the Council no longer existed. Instead, they became partners with the Compact, allies in the truest sense of the word. Human advisors helped rebuild the communication networks. Human doctors helped restore the medical systems. Human engineers helped repair the damage that years of neglect had caused. But this time, they came as equals. They gave because they chose to give, not because they were expected to serve. They helped because helping was the right thing to do, not because they wanted something in return. On the first anniversary of the Alliance, a memorial was unveiled on Meloria Prime. It stood in the ruins of the old council hall, on the spot where Daniel Shaw had once begged for respect and been denied. The memorial was a simple wall of black stone, polished smooth as glass. On it were carved the names of every human who had died in service to the galaxy during those 37 years. 3,000 names from the Battle of Sirene alone. Thousands more from 100 other battles, 100 other sacrifices, 100 other moments when humans had given everything and received nothing. Beneath the names was a single inscription. They asked for nothing but respect. We gave them everything but that. May we never forget. Ambassador Kira laid the first flower at the base of the memorial. Behind her, 1,000 others did the same. Melorians and Korath and Drevans and Yelfi, species that had once mocked humanity now standing in silence to honor the dead. Daniel Shaw watched from the crowd, Lara Vance beside him. He was old now, his hair fully gray, his body tired. But his eyes were clear, and for the first time in decades, his heart was at peace. Was it worth it? Lara asked him quietly. All those years of trying, all those years of being ignored. Was it worth it? Daniel looked at the memorial, at the names of the fallen, at the thousands of aliens who had come to pay their respects. Ask me in another 37 years, he said, but he was smiling as he said it. Silently, the humans had departed. Loudly, the galaxy had learned. And now, together, they would build something new.